Today's lesson is to solve a quadratic equation using the completing the square process. You notice that if we try to factor 3 to come up with the sum of the middle coefficient, we're not going to be able to do that. So we're going to go ahead and go through the process of completing the square. The first step is get the variables or terms alone on the left side of the equation. Just like they did here, they went ahead and they subtracted 3 from both sides. So we have x squared plus 6x equals negative 3. Next, we will find half of the coefficient of the x term. In this case, it's 6. And then square it. So we're going to get the middle number, coefficient, divided by 2. And we're going to square it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared gives you 9. So we're going to go ahead and add 9 to the left side, as well as add 9 to the right side. So I have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals, and if I add these two, I'm going to get 6. Now I'm going to go ahead and do what I call the factor sum method. I'm going to get the factors of 9. In this case, we know it's going to be 3 times 3 or 9 times 1, and we start adding. So 3 plus 3 gives you 6, and that's what we want in the middle. So really, you got to think about this, that this quadratic, we want to factor it. It's kind of, we're going the reverse of the FOIL method. So we're going to have 2 parentheses, and we're going to have x plus 3 times x plus 3. What we can do is we can rewrite this quadratic equation as x plus 3 to the second power, since it's the same binomial, and we set this equal to 6. And then the last step, to solve for x, we're going to use a square root property and get the square root of the left side as well as the right side. And so we have x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 6. So to solve for x, we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. So we have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 6. What we're going to do is we're going to continue with our lesson, and we're going to go ahead and factor, and we're going to solve this by using the completing the square process. And you notice that we have the variables on one side and we have the integer on the right side. Now what we need to do is, in order for us to find that square, to complete the square, we're going to divide 8 by 2, because that's the middle coefficient, divided by 2, and then square it. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and then 4 squared gives you 16. So now, to complete the square, we're going to add x squared plus 8x plus 16 to the left side. Also, we have negative 12 on the right side, and we're going to go ahead and add 16. So that 16 will help us to complete the square for this trinomial, to factor this trinomial. So I'm going to rewrite it. I have x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals negative 12 plus 16. You subtract and you will get 4. Now what we're going to do is this trinomial, we're going to factor this trinomial using the factor sum method, and we're going to find the factors of 16, which we know that it is a perfect number. We know 4 times 4, and we also know 16 times 1. And since we know that this is a perfect square trinomial, 4 plus 4 gives you 8, and that is the middle coefficient. So just like I said earlier, you need to understand that factoring is just the reverse of the FOIL method. So we have two parentheses, and in each parentheses we're going to have x plus 4. If you wanted to check if this is correct, all you would have to do is you'd have to multiply x plus 4 times x plus 4. So now we're going to rewrite this, and we have x plus 4 to the second power is equal to 4. And you notice we have x plus 4 to the second power. To solve for x, we're going to go ahead and get the square root of both sides. And we're going to have x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus 2. We subtract 4 from both sides. So we have x equals either 2 plus 4 or x equals negative 2 minus 4. So we have x equals, I'm sorry, this should have been 2 minus 4. So you have negative 2, and we have x equals negative 6. So those are our solutions. So we're going to continue with solving the quadratic by completing the square. And the first step is to have the variables alone, and you can see we have x squared minus 10x equals negative 14. The next step is to get half of negative 10 and then square it, and we have 25. To complete the square, we have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals negative 14 plus 25. And by adding 25 to both sides, we've completed the square. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify. I have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 11. We're going to factor the left side, and since we know that's 25, we want to find the factors of 25, which are 5 times 5, 25 times 1. We also have negative 5 times negative 5, and then we just start adding. And you notice that the only one that satisfies the condition that we have negative 10 in the middle, that we have negative 10 as a middle, negative 10 that matches our negative 10 middle coefficient is negative 5 and negative 5. So we're going to factor. We have x minus 5 times x minus 5 is equal to 11. And so we have x minus 5 raised to the second power is equal to 11. We're going to use the square root property. So we find the square root of both sides, and we're left with x minus 5 equals the square root of 11. So x is going to be equal to plus or minus square root of 11. It's actually going to be 5 plus or minus square root of 11. So now we're going to go ahead and wrap it all up together. We have x squared minus 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. And since we can't solve this by factoring, we're going to go ahead and complete the square. We're going to add 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, so we're left with x squared minus 2x is equal to 1. We're going to get the middle coefficient, which is negative 2, divided by 2, and then square it. So we have negative 2 divided by 2, which is going to be negative 1 squared. So negative 1 to the second power is 1. So at this point, we have x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 1 plus 1. Next, we're going to go ahead and factor the left side, and we're going to do that by finding the factors of 1. which the only ones we have is 1 times 1, and we have -1 times -1, which the second will satisfy having the sum as a middle coefficient. So we have x minus 1 times x minus 1 is equal to 1 plus 1, which is 2. And you notice we can rewrite this as x minus 1 to the second power is equal to 2. And then our last step is we're going to go ahead and use our square root property and get the square root. So you have x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. You add 1 to both sides, so you have x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 2.